The coffee question, as you mentioned, is something that's is certainly it's asked quite frequently. And to sort of address that question, I think people mostly are asking it in the context of a type of fasting called time-restricted eating. Time-restricted eating, it has a fasting component to it, but it also has a circadian biology component to it. And people might go, well, what is circadian biology? And really, just sort of think about the fact that, you're awake during certain times. So you're awake in the morning, early in the morning, your body produces a stress hormone called cortisol, wakes you up, you're alert, you're active, you do all your activities. And then as the day progresses and nighttime comes on, you get sleepy, your body's making melatonin, it helps you with, getting tired, and then you go to sleep and things sort of shut down, right?
All these natural pathways.
Right, it's just sort of this rhythm, this circadian rhythm. That's why they call it, circadian rhythm. Yep. So it turns out, every cell in our body has one of those, and including, pathways like metabolism. So it's really important to make sure that you're consuming food when, the metabolic pathways are active. You don't want to eat when they're not active. And so a lot of this work has been done by Dr. Sachin Panda at the Salk Institute and some of his colleagues. They've shown that what activates metabolism is, basically when you take in your first food, you activate those metabolic pathways, and then they'll be active for a certain amount of time. And then as the day goes on, they become less active. For example, if you look at men who eat the same meal early in the morning and then they eat the same meal later in the evening, same calories, same macronutrient content, everything, they're more insulin sensitive in the morning and they're less insulin sensitive in the evening. Fatty acid metabolism is the same way, so you may think, well, maybe I'll just eat some fat in the evening. Well, it turns out your fatty acids and being able to use those as energy is also on a circadian clock, and it's less active in the evening as well. So, with that said, where does coffee come into play? Right. Coffee. If you're talking about coffee with cream, obviously cream is got calories and fat, and that's something that would be considered food, right? Cream. If you're talking about just black coffee without any
or espresso, like a shot of espresso.
Exactly, yeah. Or espresso, something without any calories, essentially.
Right.
Then the question becomes, does that count as starting your clocks? And there's no real direct data that has addressed that question. A couple of my thoughts are, for one, we do know that caffeine itself changes the circadian clocks. So if you give someone a cup of coffee later in the day, it actually shifts the body's circadian clock, that natural rhythm, by like 40 minutes. So coffee itself is changing the circadian clocks.
It's extending it essentially.
Yeah, it's yeah, exactly.
Right.
And additionally, caffeine is metabolized by the gut. It's also metabolized by the liver. So the question is, does that, activating those metabolic pathways, does that start your clocks? We don't really know if it's enough to or not. What we do know is that, there have been some studies, for example, a study done by Dr. Ruth Patterson at UCSD. She looked at time-restricted eating in women that had previously had breast cancer, women that ate all of their food within 11 hours and they fasted for 13 hours. During that 13 hours, they were allowed to consume caffeine, so black coffee or tea without cream. And even though they consumed the coffee during their fasting period, they still had a 36% reduction in breast cancer recurrence. So they had positive benefits. Along the same lines, there's been some pilot studies in people with type 2 diabetes where they've done time-restricted eating for anywhere between a 6 to 8 hour window. So they're eating within a shorter window and they're fasting for 16 or more hours a day. They're also allowed to consume caffeine or tea, and they had positive effects on blood glucose regulation, insulin sensitivity, weight loss. So clearly there's evidence in the scientific literature that if you consume black coffee within that fasting window, there's still positive effects happening. If you're talking about just, like I mentioned, time-restricted eating, this is something that you're practicing on a daily basis, right? This is, you're eating your food within an 8 to 12-hour time window, and you're fasting, for 16 or up to 12 to 16 hours, right? There's other types of fasting which we can talk about, you know, where you're doing
we're going to get
longer.
into that with another question with different modalities of fasting.
Yeah, and in that case, research has also shown if you consume black coffee or tea without any calories, that there's still benefits.
Great.
So, you know, aspect of the fasting literature, and that is, you know, there are many benefits that occur during a fast, and there are many types of fasting, and when you're actually fasting, some of the things that are occurring are you're lowering different you're deactivating pathways that are typically like a grow pathway. For example, it's called IGF-1. It's a grow pathway. mTOR is another grow pathway. Both of those pathways are activated by amino acids, and so if you're limiting your amino acid intake along with your caloric intake and everything else, you're going to deactivate those pathways, and the deactivation of those pathways, IGF-1 will go down, mTOR will go down, and those are essential for the activation of some of the benefits of fasting, including a process called autophagy, which is basically when your cells start to recycle, and interestingly, they seem to recycle damaged components of themselves. So like mitochondria, which are, you know, they're the powerhouse of energy in your cell. Damaged mitochondria can be cleared away. As though, you know, at least according to these studies, that you know, it's not negating those metabolic benefits.
Okay.
However, the question becomes, if you were not to consume that, would you have a more robust effect?
Got it.
We don't know. For that to happen, you know. So, and then there's other things as well, like which we can talk about when we get into more of a prolonged type of fast. Those things also need to be deactivated. So amino acids would be something that would sort of negate that.
Interrupt that natural reduction of IGF-1, which may interfere with some autophagy.
Right.